Hello, my name's Roisin and I'm sick of reading. Hello friends, today's video is going to hopefully be a chill, cosy video with some book recommendations for you. I've not been having a great time lately. And for those of you who don't know, I have psoriatic arthritis. It's a chronic autoimmune condition that affects my joints and means that I am in pain a lot of the time, and I also deal with fatigue and various other symptoms. I also have other autoimmune conditions. At the beginning of this year I was put on immunosuppressants in order to tackle my autoimmune conditions, and then there was a global pandemic and I am immunosuppressed during that time, which causes a lot of stress and anxiety. The other thing that has happened is that those drugs that they put me on in January have stopped working. To begin with, my skin cleared up and my joints started to hurt less, although I was dealing with some digestive trouble which was unrelated and meant that I didn't really notice how well the effects were working. But in the past 6 weeks, slowly, bit by bit, they've started to wear off, and in these past 2 weeks, especially with the heightened anxiety, which anxiety and stress are some of the major triggers for autoimmune conditions, I've just been in a lot of pain and really tired. And I know that there are a lot of people in the world dealing with some serious things at the moment. Black people are being murdered by the police. People in my country are pretending like we are better than America because they think people are not murdered here. Although Stephen Lawrence's family would have something to say about that. And I know that it's frustrating, stressful, traumatic for people who are black people and other people of colour as well, but especially black people at this time. And of course everyone is dealing with the global pandemic situation and the easing of restrictions, and the government's not being very good at that either. So I thought that this would be the perfect time to bring you a video of recommendations of books that you can lose yourself in. I did a video similar to this earlier in the year, I think just as lockdown was starting. That was a video of cosy books, so I'll leave them up here in the cards so you can check those ones out as well if you want even more recommendations. I will say that this list is pretty white. They are mostly books by white people about white people, and I know that that is a failing of my own reading history and something that I need to correct. A lot of the recommendations that I've heard for books by people of colour or about people of colour that are in this sort of escapist realm are YA and fantasy, which is not something that I read, but that is no real excuse, and I should be able to find the slightly magic but in the real world, or the historical fiction that is not surrounding war and trauma that I prefer for my escapist fiction. I will leave in the description links to people of colour who have done similar videos for this if you would like to hear a different perspective on books you can lose yourself in. These books are lightly magical but grounded in the real world, whimsical books with atmospheric worlds, historical fiction that don't centre around war and trauma, and some poetry and some nature writing. So hopefully that is a range of topics that might interest you. Please remember to like this video if you like it, and subscribe for more recommendations and reviews. The first book on my list is one that is very popular on BookTube, and that is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a book about a circus that arrives without warning and is only open between dusk and dawn, and a competition between two men and the two children that they are their pawns in this competition. They teach them magic and how to do magic. They have two different perspectives on this, and they set them against one another, building magical tents, and it is set at the turn of the century, and so there is a slight historical feeling to this book, but it is also full of magic and whimsy and adventure. I love the atmosphere in this book, the setting. You definitely feel something a bit magical and crackly. It's almost a Christmassy book without actually being Christmassy, just that feeling of anticipation and joy that I get from reading it, and I definitely recommend it if you like books with a little magic in them. The circus arrives without warning. No announcements precede it. It is simply there, when yesterday it was not. Within the black and white striped canvas tents is an utterly unique experience full of breathtaking amazements. It is called Le Cirque du Rêve, and it is only open at night. The second book on my list is similar, I would say, to The Night Circus. Slightly more sci-fi than fantasy, perhaps. It is set in London in 1883, when a man finds a mysterious watch in his house. He doesn't know how it got there, but one day it starts ticking. And it warns him of a bomb that goes off. And he and sets him to find the man who made it, in order to find out how he knew that a bomb was going to go off. Although the Watchmaker seems harmless, a chain of inexplicable events seem to soon suggest that he might be hiding something. When a physicist interferes, suddenly the main character has divided loyalties. So this book has that atmosphere, and it is there's a lot of clockwork and impossible things. There's fortune telling, but explained by Victorian understandings of ether science, which is something about thoughts moving through the air, through the ether, and they would disturb the ether. I didn't 100% understand that, but it definitely has a sort of adventure feel with bombs going off and a mystery trying to work out what's going on, how he knew the bombs were going to go off. There is also the Watchmaker is Japanese, and there is stuff about the Japanese Civil War because it jumps back and forward in time, and it also has gay and bisexual representation in it, if that is something you look for in your books. Under the gas lamps, mist poured at the windows of the closed shops, which became steadily shabbier nearer home. It was such a smooth ruination that he could have been walking forward through time, watching the same buildings age 5 years with every step, all still as a museum. Another lightly magical book is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. This book is based on Russian folklore and is set in the 11th century in Russia, I believe. It's definitely medieval. At the edge of the Russian wilderness, this family live in a place where snowdrifts grow taller than houses. They all sleep on top of the oven and huddle around the fires telling each other stories. The story of Frost, a blue-eyed demon of winter, and of the spirits that protect their home. One day, the main character's father brings back a woman from Moscow to be his new wife, and she is terrified of everything in the home. She can see these demons, and she is a good Christian woman and believes they are evil. But the main character knows that they depend on these spirits in order to be safe in winter time. This is a series of books, but I have only read the first one, and I definitely really enjoyed it. I listened to it on audiobook, which I find personally to be the most comforting way to read books. It's lovely to have someone tell you a story. I love the atmosphere in this book, the snowdrifts, the magic, and the creatures, the way that they seemed so real and integral to the world around them. It wasn't too much fantasy, there wasn't a huge amount of world building necessary because the world felt so realistic, and I loved the historical setting of it as well. In Russia, Frost was called Morozko, the demon of winter, but long ago the people called him Karachon, the death god. Under that name he was king of black midwinter who came for bad children and froze them in the night. It was an ill-omened word, and unlucky to speak it while he still held the land in his grip. And then my final magical one is one that you have probably all read, but if you haven't, you should go and read as soon as possible. And that is the His Dark Materials series by Philip Pullman. Again, the first book, The Northern Lights, is set in an alternate Victorian Oxford, rather than London this time. It is a world of scholars and dust and strange unexplained things and people snatching children. It is like our own world, except that people's spirits are on the outside, called demons. And it is one of my favourite series of all time. It is so heartwarming and special. It's a sort of children's book that works even as an adult. Set a lot during winter, the first book especially, which I think adds to the cosy feeling. And I love the found families that are throughout this novel. The idea hovered and shimmered delicately, like a soap bubble. And she dared not even look at it directly in case it burst. But she was familiar with the way of ideas, and she let it shimmer, looking away, thinking about something else. Now for historical novels, I of course would be remiss if I didn't recommend my favourite series of all time, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This novel, you can entirely lose yourself in someone else's head, which is excellent. I love it. It is a series about Thomas Cromwell, who was the consigliere for Henry VIII from the time of his wanting to divorce Catherine of Aragon until after the death of Anne Boleyn. And the first book is about the divorce from Catherine of Aragon, and Thomas Cromwell is working with Wolsey, and it is a sort of historical novel where you look up and are like, wow, I thought I was in Tudor England and I am not. You completely become absorbed and immersed in this man's head. The language is incredibly beautiful and so perfectly pitched to make it feel Tudor without making it difficult to read. I absolutely found it so absorbing, and because there are 3 books, but altogether nearly 2,000 pages. There's definitely a lot to sink your teeth into and get lost in. You can have a silence full of words. A lute retains in its bowl the notes it has played. The viol in its string holds a concord. A shrivelled petal can hold its scent. A prayer can rattle with curses. An empty house, when the owners have gone out, can still be loud with ghosts. The other historical fiction I have is another big chunky one, and that is The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. I've talked about this before in my favourite historical fiction novels video, so if you'd like to hear even more about it, you can check out there. But this is a novel set during the New Zealand Gold Rush, and it is based around the zodiac, and the 12 main characters each represent a different zodiac sign, and they have the personalities of that zodiac sign, but you don't need to know anything about the zodiac. It's just a really clever way that it's constructed. It is a mystery. There is a missing person. There are people who have died and left legacies that changed the world, the world of this small town. It is so well written that each of the characters individually feel so real, but also are so well differentiated in voice. You would never get confused about whose story you were reading, even though there are so many characters. The atmosphere and the setting is so strong that you really feel like you are in this place being whipped by the sea, and the mystery within it kept driving me on to want to read more. Dawn is such a private hour, don't you think? Such a solitary hour. One always hears that said of midnight, but I think of midnight as remarkably companionable. Everybody together, sleeping in the dark. I'm afraid I am interrupting your solitude, Anna said. No, no, the boy said. Oh no. Solitude is a condition best enjoyed in company. He grinned at her quickly, and Anna smiled back. Especially the company of one other soul, he added, turning back to the sea. I have two contemporary literary fiction novels next, and the first one of those is White Teeth by Zadie Smith. This is a novel about two friends, Archie Jones and Samad Iqbal, and their families. They meet in the war and are somehow tied together. We're not entirely sure how, but it plays out over the course of the novel, and it's about 3 generations of families in North London. It's definitely got very much a North London culture to it, which, if that is not a world you know, is a great one you could lose yourself in, because the building of that setting in this novel is so strong. It is an epic exploration of these families and of modern London and of race in London, because Archie marries a Jamaican girl who is half his age, and they have a mixed race child, and then Samad Iqbal and his wife are Pakistani Muslims, and they have 2 twin sons, both of whom go in entirely different directions. And then there is a third family, a middle-class liberal family, and we see the hypocrisies and the limitations of their liberalism, their devil's advocacies, and the dangers of their science, the scientific beliefs, and the people they end up aligning themselves with. It is a really, really funny novel. We see all the foibles of all of these characters, and each one is treated with such affection, but also with such understanding. We see their faults and their flaws and where they are prejudiced, because they all hold prejudices within them. And we see the way that the world reacts to them and the limitations placed on their world. What I love about this novel is when you just feel like you're getting into the groove with what is going to happen, something strange comes out of left field, but it is about history and how what happened before still loops back and ties into the present, and the ending has a great button on that theme of things coming back from the past to haunt you. We are so convinced of the goodness of ourselves and the goodness of our love, we cannot bear to believe there might be something more worthy of love than us, more worthy of worship. Greeting cards routinely tell us everybody deserves love. No, everybody deserves clean water. Not everybody deserves love all of the time. Then my other contemporary literary fiction, I think, is actually historical, but not far past historical, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tart. Of course, being someone who has a classics degree, I felt this closely in that sense, but this is about these 5 elite snobby people who go to this elite small university and have a charismatic Greek teacher and become obsessed with each other and with their sense of their own importance. They transgress beyond the boundaries of what is appropriate behaviour with their obsession with Dionysus descend into corruption and betrayal. We know from the beginning of this book that someone has been murdered, and this book is sort of a discovery of what has happened and how it has happened. It is a really great mystery, which is something that is always good to lose yourself in. It is a world and an atmosphere, despite being true to our world, is not something that most of us have lived through, and it builds a little tiny world in which it is possible to be both the outsider and to see ourselves in these strange people. The writing is beautiful and hypnotic and kind of draws you straight in. I think if you read YA and you are a fan of We Were Liars, you'll definitely enjoy The Secret History. It's funny, but thinking back on it now, I realised that this particular point in time, as I stood there blinking in the deserted hall, was the one point at which I might have chosen to do something very different from what I actually did. But of course I didn't see this crucial moment for what it actually was. I suppose we never do. Instead, I only yawned and shook myself from the momentary daze that had come upon me, and went on my way down the stairs. The next book that I'm going to recommend to you is actually not a book, it is a poet, and I would recommend any of her works that you can get your hands on, and that is Mary Oliver. Poetry may not be everyone's form of escape, and it's definitely not different worlds or fantasy, especially not Mary Oliver's style of poetry. Mary Oliver writes about our world and nature more specifically, and I think that her work is definitely something to soothe the soul. She writes about personal connections with nature, and about understanding ourselves through nature, and about the beauty of humanity and the human experience as understood as an individual soul. Her work is just stunningly beautiful, and is definitely something that I find as I definitely find reading her work is a great form of self-care. My partner just brought me a cup of tea and a slice of cake, which is very nice. It's too hot to drink, so I'll just finish the video and then I'll get on with it. So where was I? When it's over, I want to say, all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it is over, I don't want to wonder if I have made something of my life, something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. The final book on my list is one that I am cheating with a bit because I haven't actually finished it yet, and that is Underworld by Robert Mcfarlane. This is a non-fiction work of nature writing that won the Wainwright Prize last year, and it is about explorations of all of the buried things under the ground. He goes into caves, he looks at stations underground where scientists look for dark matter, and he talks about burial and everything, and talks about deep time, stretching backwards and forwards in time, talks about mining, talks about fossil fuels, talks about climate change. It is so beautiful. When I listened to the audiobook and I am listening to the audiobook and my partner said it sounds like a poem, which it does. It's written almost like fiction a lot of the time. It is incredibly beautiful and powerful and moving. I'm definitely looking forward to reading more of it, and I definitely have got lost underground. We all carry trace fossils within us, the marks that the dead and the mist leave behind. Handwriting on an envelope, the wear on a wooden step left by footfall, the memory of a familiar gesture by someone gone, repeated so often it has worn its own groove in both air and mind. These are trace fossils too. Sometimes, in fact, all that is left behind by a loss is a trace. Sometimes empty volume can be easier to hold in the heart than presence itself. So there you go, 10 books to escape into and to lose yourself completely. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you found some recommendations to lose yourself in. Please let me know in the comments what your favourite books to disappear into are, especially if you have any recommendations so that I can diversify my reading. Please remember to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe because I will be back the day after tomorrow. Thank you for watching. Bye bye!